So, how did the cakes turn out? It's still in the oven.
Yeah.
So if I go over, you're going to start feeling panicky.
I've turned the oven off.
All right.
It's just the bottom bit that did a bit more TLC.
So anyway, my name is Mahesi, and I've been interested in what's going on, I suppose, since I was a child, and that culminated as a result of all sorts of things that I experienced in me going to the monastery. I arrived my 22nd birthday to ordain Harnham Monastery with a monk called Ajahn Cha, and big leap of faith. I didn't really know what was in store for me, but I suppose I'd reached a point where I had a very strong sense that there was a lot more to life than was being spoken of, lived in the world that I was in. So I took a sort of an extreme decision to plunge in a bit more deeply. It wasn't without cause, but that's all another matter. So I was inspired when I met the monks, particularly the Western monks, because they were the first Westerners I'd ever met. I knew had something about them that actually was really different and almost magnetic. And I just couldn't ignore the fact that there was a quality of aliveness there and stillness that I hadn't encountered before. So I had to find out how they did it. And that was the sort of the beginning of my monastic journey. I stayed for 15 years. Then I left, because I'm not a monk anymore. This isn't what monks look like. And got married, got divorced. I've been on the worldly road. But I've never abandoned or lost faith in what I learned in the monasteries. And as I grow older, in fact, it boomerangs back and ever more strongly. And so here I am. So I'm going to try and share with you what I can about what I've picked up along the way, and pack in 35 years of living into an hour and a half, whatever it is. But this much I do know, that a life without attending to the imperative, that is really the process of continuing to grow, is a life that becomes increasingly difficult, because that imperative to grow, to change, to understand is hardwired into the universe. We're already have been forced to be born and to become adults, and then to go through middle age and old age, death. These are all fairly intimidating transitions to the majority of us. So transition and change is already built into the system. So if you just sort of ignore it and resist it, then sense of meaning, sense of fulfillment, sense of well-being, happiness sort of becomes increasingly sort of diminished. Life really ultimately becomes ruled by an underlying quality of anxiety. And it's that underlying quality of anxiety which really governs a lot of what's going on in the world. That anxiety exists with good cause. From the perspective that you're familiar with, it would appear that we are, doomed to old age, sickness and death. And all of that goes along with that is not particularly appetizing. So we try to make the best of ignoring these inevitabilities and try and make life, as comfortable and as tolerable as possible. But within everybody, there's the knowledge that there's something much bigger going on that is as yet certainly not addressed, but definitely not understood. So it's the process then of understanding what is our true position in the universe. And in particular, I think what always was of particular concern to me was the impact of impermanence, how to make sense of life, given that all of life past. Was particularly affected one evening when I was watching Patrick Moore describe in great detail, which he actually seemed to quite relish, how the sun was going to die and then turn into a red dwarf, and then a white giant, and then a black hole, and then he said, and then at that point in time the earth will just be evaporated. And as I followed this through, I kind of evaporated, and it was a very sort of striking moment where I wouldn't say I was haunted by the fact of impermanence, but I was deeply affected by it and couldn't really find a way of making sense or meaning out of the world as it, in the light of that inevitable fact. So, that is a fact that concerns us all. That's a fact that we're all confronted with. Not everybody necessarily opens to the experience of that fact fully to the point where they feel that sense of shock like I did in that moment. But even so, we are living with the shock of birth and the shock of the incredible immense implications of it all and the enormity of it all. So how to address all of that? Well, that's really what the meditative journey is about. It's about fundamentally it's not about getting away from the human condition or getting away from what we perceive to be an imperfect circumstance, and where we sort of ascend to some plane of perfection. I used to sort of have an image that I was going to sort of take off in a spaceship and go somewhere else that was going to be better. And of course that's not an uncommon sort of thing that we kind of imagine, that there's somewhere better than this that we're going to get to through doing this sort of spiritual work. And to be honest, it's not a fantasy that accords with the truth as I've come to understand it. It's the opposite. We have to learn to understand what's already here. The fact is, we don't really trust what's here. In particular, we don't trust the body. So the body is something that we distrust. We feel threatened by it, intimidated by it, and that it's inevitably going to fail us at some point. And because we don't trust the body, we desensitize our relationship to the body. When we desensitize our relationship to the body, we don't actually discover what it is. Now, we have views about what the body is. We've all studied biology and science, and we live in very materialistic age in the sense of we tend to be subliminally in agreement with the received wisdom that everything basically functions in terms of molecules and chemical reactions, and that matter, physical matter, is certainly dead or without consciousness, and that science pretty much explains what's going on. And many people think that the body, is just organs and chemical reactions, and that consciousness is just the sum total of a sort of complicated sequence of chemical reactions. And it all sounds very credible, and of course science supports this, but none of it is of concern to me really, because what I'm interested in is what is the experience of the body, not what others tell me is the body. And it's the experiencing of the full measure of what the body actually is that is the contemplative journey, is the discovery of what it is. And believe me, truth is much stranger than fiction. It's not that we are shuttered in or into this envelope of the skin. That is a false impression. The fact is, when you start looking into the body, it immediately starts to get difficult to sort of understand in conventional terms exactly what's going on. But it's the surrendering to that is the contemplative journey, and the more we surrender to it, the more and more, you can say, transparent the body becomes. It becomes much less the thing that determines one's sense of how we're located in the universe. In fact, it can become quite a small factor. As this sort of the apparent inside and the actually alive outside begin to connect with each other, the sense of being bounded within this skin starts to deteriorate. And so that's what I'm into. And so then it's one thing to talk about it. What is of particular interest is what you might call the pointing out instructions, and the different, what we would call in the tradition upaya, or skillful means that help, you could say, scale you into a direct experiencing of the full measure of who and what you are. Now, of course, you can't jump from where you are to the end of the journey. Well, there isn't, in fact, an end of the journey. That's another position that I believe to be true. But so, it's kind of like getting into the sea or something. That transition from one state to another, you generally go quite gradually. You get accustomed little by little. In fact, the word for meditation in Tibetan Buddhism is gom, which means to become familiar with. So it's a gradual process of becoming familiar with not just your limited nature, but your unlimited or limitless nature. And even logically it makes sense. Science is pointing to the fact that the universe is probably infinite. And it's quite logical to recognize the body is not separate from the universe. It's not separate from the universe. So now neurology tells us that we only experience less than 0.1% of the information that is actually available to the body. So there's a split there. Our thinking mind, our mind that is the mind that we've, where we kind of interpret the world in a way that is familiar to us, is not in touch with the full picture. It's only in touch with less than 0.1% of the picture, in fact. So this journey back into the soma, it's it. This fathom length body, as it says in the scriptures. The 4 foundations of mindfulness. The coming to know, coming first of all to sense the actual, the concrete nature, just the organs themselves, that which we've recoiled from because of the vulnerability that they represent. So the journey back to that, and it kind of goes through many different layers. Of course, there's the process of just learning to trust the physical, and then as you trust the physical, starts to blend into, you could say, fields of sensation that are without dimension as we understand it in normal terms, because they don't have these fields of sensation don't have a middle, they don't have an edge. They're actually oceanic. If you experience them directly, that is what they are. If you think, well, this is my knee hurting, then you don't experience it directly, but you're overlaying the actual experience with some sort of thought-out interpretation. And then, as you embrace more and more, the fields of sensation, you come to what we might call the luminosity of the mind. It's the ground luminosity. It's the true nature of what the mind is, and perhaps it's not, commonly discussed around the kitchen table, but it should be, because it's the gold that we're all looking for, and it's through the direct ability, I suppose, to surrender into that and ultimately become it, that we find the safety we seek. And so this need for safety is very, very fundamental to the whole journey. So the reason that we are, you could say, body and mind are split, and we spend a lot of our time in a kind of, trying to think things out, trying to find a solution to the predicament that is life, through constantly thinking. The reason that we're doing that is that there is a predicament, we don't feel safe, we're looking for safety, but we don't trust the body, we don't trust that there's gold to be discovered there. No one's ever told us that it's a gateway to much more than just sinew and flesh and vulnerability and old age, sickness and death. There's a lot more to it that is discovered, so that when we distrust, we turn away. So the meditation practice then is very much about, well, first of all, being encouraged to turn towards, and then as you begin to experience directly and trust the power of direct experience, the trust begins to arise naturally, because, your heart, the spiritual heart, starts to awaken, starts to recognize there is this process of arising and passing away, but there is also this other thing that isn't arising and passing away. If you just look at your breath, for example, the breath arises and then it passes away, and then there is a pause, and that pause has a quality of absolute stillness. So there's movement, and there's all the movement that we experience through the body as sensations and contraction and disease and heat and blood, sweat and tears and emotion, feeling. And then there's the through good meditation instruction, there's the gradual recognition that there is this other thing that isn't moving. It isn't moving, but it's certainly not dead. It's alive, it's intelligent, it even understands in a non-conceptual way, in the sense of there's no understander. It's not second-hand news, it's direct news. So the journey into the body then, you could say, is also non-conceptual, in that we learn to trust direct experience or pure experience, where the division between the experiencer and the experience dissolves, which is pretty cool. And it's the very thing that a lot of people, chase in sports and in other forms. Bungee jumping, for example, is a classic form of seeking an experience of this non-conceptual aliveness, because when you jump off that, whatever it is, 200-meter platform, for that period of time you're falling through the air, your thinking stops. You don't have time for any of that. You get a blast of aliveness. That means, when it's over, you think, wow, that was amazing, I'm going to do it again, or whatever. It was amazing for that moment of time. So, the thing is, they say the reason people bungee jump is not because they're looking for that experience of aliveness, it's because they're looking for containment. They're looking for a container in which they can have that experience of aliveness in a way that's manageable. Because you only have to manage it for a very short period of time. And then it's over, and then you're back to a more familiar experience of aliveness. So then the spiritual journey then is about being able to kind of gradually get into this much more direct experience of aliveness, develop the right kind of containment so as it's sustainable, you can sustain it for long enough, for real, you could say, structural change to take place. So the sense of who and what you are radically changes. So the sense of who and what you are right now is, more often than not, or is quite commonly, I'm located somewhere behind my eyes, somewhere inside of the body, but actually, if I'm totally honest, it's not particularly self-evident where the hell I am. If you stand in front of a mirror and look at yourself, I remember doing this right from when I was a child, and just wondering, who is it or what is it that's staring back at me, and where am I? Who's the one that's seeing, the one that's looking back at me, and all this sort of thing, and it's kind of like, when you're speaking, who's speaking? Where's the speech coming from? Who's the one that's speaking? When you're listening, who's the hearer? I mean, we've kind of adapted a kind of habit, a coping mechanism that helps us sort of manage our way through it. And we just don't really ask the question. But when you do ask the question, it becomes pretty obvious quite quickly that we don't really know what the hell's going on. I mean, it's not obvious. And anyone who claims to know it is a liar, because the more you surrender to the way it is, the less you can actually know about what's going on. You just find that it works. And it's self-evident. That it's a mystery. But there's a point of stillness that becomes your true home. That is at the heart of that mystery, and a quality not just of stillness, but of radiance and of being held by something that has a quality of safety. And that's it. Speech then just happens as and when required. Listening happens as and when required. Thinking happens as and when required. But it's generally rendered substantial by the fact that you are attuned to the substance or to the heart of what is going on. So, I've probably said enough. I'm just trying to give you a kind of a broad stroke picture of where I'm coming from. I'm going to do a bit of chanting, then we'll do a meditation that has a sort of somatic emphasis that will emphasize a way of looking into the body to try and begin to get some anchorage into direct experience, and begin to disrupt and challenge this kind of inherited process of interpreting everything through the speech mind, which has its function, but is not capable of telling us the truth of what our life is. So, in the brain sciences, they're recognizing there's the left and the right brain, the left and right hemisphere, and that this left side of the brain, which has a lot to do with the whole process of interpreting and organizing and working out what happened in the past and what may happen in the future, and sort of planning and all the rest of it. That is one side of the brain. It is the side of the brain that is producing your thoughts. There's the right side of the brain, which is to do more with direct experience. And there's a cluster of nerves that cross the left and the right side of the brain called the magnus callosum, I think. And unfortunately, it's quite, in many people, it's been, quite, it's not in good condition. It's been, because we overuse the sort of speech faculty so much, and we don't trust direct experience enough for it to stay healthy. But it's also been shown that the brain has tremendous healing capacity, great plasticity, I think is the word. And so meditation really has been shown to very rapidly regrow the nerves that join the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And when that begins to happen, the way we experience the world changes. So the kind of instruction I want to give is the sort of instruction that is very much concerned with using that much less used side of the brain. Okay, so I'm going to chant for a few minutes, then we'll do some meditation.